think there should be enough time for everyone to join. If some of us are joining a bit later, they'll just miss the housekeeping rules. Nothing too bad. But let's get started for those of you who are here. Here we go. So, hello, my name is Arlemi, as you may have seen next to my picture. I'm a developer advocate at Postman, which means my role is not only to talk to you about how to use Postman, but also to learn from you about what's the best use you can make of Postman and how you would like to use it. So if you have any general feedback, general questions, or if you just want to talk about anything Postman related, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Arlemi, or you can just type in Arlemi in Google, and all of the front page should be my socials or stuff related to me. So you can find me anywhere basically. And yeah, do not hesitate to reach out. A few things that I want to cover before we start. If there are questions, and I already know there's quite a few, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you look in the Zoom toolbar, there's a Q&A thing, use that. And I have plenty of colleagues that happily join me today to help you with that. So I don't have to answer all questions at the same time. We have solution engineers, product support, customer success, etc. that we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So click Q&A, post your questions there. And for any question that is not answered, there will also be a Q&A at the end where I'll be replying to your questions. That session is about an hour, more or less, based on how many questions there is. But it is also recorded. So if you have to leave before the end, it's fine. I won't be mad. You can leave, and you'll be able to catch the recording. We'll send it to everyone, and it will be available on our YouTube channel as well. And last but not least, yes, you're all on mute. I'm the only one who has the power to speak, just for technical reasons. If the now 5,000 of you were trying to speak at the same time, it would get really messy. So yeah, just ask your question on the Q&A and we should all be fine. So I want to start with welcoming you all here. This webinar is for people that are getting started with Postman, or that have just had basic usage of it and want to learn more. So whether you clicked on the email that invited you to that webinar, whether someone talked about the webinar to you, or whether you just found that webinar by mistake, welcome to all of you. And hopefully we'll have a good hour and you'll discover quite a few stuff from Postman today. So what are we going to do today? 5 main things. What is Postman? Because that's always a good start, right? You want to know what is that app and what it does. Then we'll get started. I'll show you the app. I'll show you around the app. I'll show you different places, how to do the basic things. Then we'll jump into tips and tricks. Tips and tricks, basically, as we've learned from our users and as we've learned from our users, we've discovered neat ways to do things in Postman, and we want to share that with you so you don't have to learn on your own, and we can just feed that to you, and hopefully you can enjoy that. And then we'll go through resources. So basically how to make it so you don't have to always watch me talk about Postman or me or my colleagues. I'll just show you the right places on the internet that you can go to and find the right answers to your questions. And last, as I said, we'll have a Q&A where we'll just go through your questions that were not answered before. So as we're going to talk a lot about APIs, because that's what Postman is about, right? Testing and designing APIs. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with giving you all a definition of an API, a simple definition of it, and API endpoint. So an API is something that sends information back and forth between a website or app and a user. So usually, let's say when you log into a website, you'll enter your username and password, and this will be sent to an API that will talk to a server somewhere, and it's just going to pass that information from one to the other, like back and forth. An API endpoint is a subset of an API, and this is, let's say you have the Facebook API. A subset of this is going to be the user endpoint, where you can add user, you can log in with the user, you can delete the user and stuff like that. So I'll be using these words quite a lot. I just wanted to make sure that we're all aware of what this was. Cool. So what is Postman? Postman started as a side project by our CEO when he was working at Yahoo, because he was struggling to test its API. And so he just created a Chrome app, posted it on Stack Overflow, it grew up, and now It's a whole API development platform, from designing an API to testing it to publishing it as documentation, etc. And it's used by, I need to update that slide, it's 11 million people now and 500,000 companies. And for many teams, Postman is a tool that they use to collaborate on APIs. So if you're a developer on your own, if you just like working on the side project, you may use Postman on your own, but there's a lot of teams out there that are using Postman to share stuff between their team, to make sure that everyone is on top of, like, is aware of the latest version of the API, and they can do stuff all together without having to share using a USB stick or something like that. So you have everything that is shared within Postman. And I'll give you an example of that later. So let's get started. I'll show you an overview of the app, and hopefully everything will work. I'm doing all the demos during that webinar live, so please don't be too mad if something doesn't work, but hopefully it should all work. So we start with an overview of the app, what our workspace is, what's a collection, what you can do with it, and what's the API builder. So let's go ahead and have a look at it. So that's your Postman. If you're a new joiner and you just created your account, that's what you're greeted for. You have a launchpad, it's called, which tells you, good afternoon, Michael Scott, if your name is Michael Scott, or good afternoon, your name, and gives you an overview of what you can do. So you can start with something new, creating a request, creating a collection, environment, etc. Some lessons, so bootcamp lessons as we call them, but I'll go into that later, and some news about the events that are coming up, like the one that you're attending right now, also templates API that you can import straight away. So that's your main window. And if you look at the top, you have workspaces. So the workspace is this whole thing that you see behind, and you can create different ones. You can create different personal workspaces if you have different projects, for example, but you can also create team workspaces for collaboration. And that's something that I'm gonna talk about later. So now I'm in my personal workspace. There's things at the top here that I can see. So create new button, that's always where you're gonna start from. And you just go and say, if you want to create a request, a collection, environment, etc. And then here you have 3 tabs. So the history, anytime you send something from Postman, it's going to be shown here. So let's say you've sent a request, it succeeded, then you edited it, doesn't succeed anymore. You can go back to your history and make sure that you can access it again. The collections, a collection is kind of the gateway to a lot of things in Postman. It can be a gateway to a monitor, to a mock server, to collections. It's one of the starting points that we have in Postman, where you store all your requests. And then the API builder that you find under the API tab. This is where you can design and add API elements to your API, like documentation, test suite, etc. If you're not sure about what this does, there's a lesson already right here that you can click on, the start button, and it's going to show you what it's capable of. So I'd recommend going through that. But for now, I'm mostly going to look at collections. So just go back here. Cool. So I've showed you workspaces, collections, and API builder, which are the main bits of Postman and where you spend most of your time when using Postman. Now, how do you send a request? Because that's what you want to do when you open Postman. So there's different type of requests. I'm not going to go through them all, but that's the 4 main ones I would say: get, post, put, and delete. And we also see how to add parameters. So as I said before, when you want to start, you can start from the new button, and I'm going to create a new collection for this whole webinar, and I'm going to call it webinar collection and give it a description. This is the collection that I'll use for this webinar. Cool. So now on the left, you can see I have a webinar collection and it has 0 requests in there. So I can expand it and add a request. So I'll call this one get example request and save it to that collection. Cool. I have a request, and so before I go ahead, I'll give you a quick description of what you're seeing here and what it does. You have your request with the request name, and you could add a description here. You have your request URL box here, where you add whichever URL you want to query. You put the URL here, then you can click send, and it's going to send the request. And you have different options that you can add to your request. So whether you're familiar or not, There's two types of params that you can add to your request URL, which are query params and path parameters, and this is where you would add them. If it is an API that requires authentication, which most of them do, just to make sure, like API rate limiting, whether it's a paid API, just for security. So you can add authorization here, and you can talk about different type of authorization. So OAuth 2.0, AWS signature, API key, headers. So you may want to send specific headers to your request, content type, something like that. Body, if it's a post or a put, for example, you may have some content here, and we'll look at that later. And pre-request and test script, that's something we'll go in later. So let's go ahead and send our first request. I'm going to use the Postman Eco API. This is something that we put out there for our users to just try out API and see how it works. So you can use that URL and click send. So what happened? As you see, there was a small loading time, and it comes back with a response. So basically, this Postman Eco is kind of a ping pong API. Whatever you send to it, it's going to send it back to you. So now I can see that I have a response with no arguments because I've not added any parameters. And I can see my parameters here. I can see it was 200 OK. So good. Good response. It worked. I can see it took 210 milliseconds with a breakdown of what happened during the request. And I can see the size of the response as well. If I'm adding a parameter right here, and I call that parameter name, and I'll say my name is Michael. As you can see, as I was adding the parameter here, it also added it in my request directly. So I do not have to edit my URL. I can just use that, that handy UI and add as many parameters as I want. And now if I send this, you can see that that API is now returning me this, this parameter, name and value Michael. The other type of parameter that I was talking about was path parameter. So this one, as his name says, right? You add to the path and you add a param here. And as you managed to see, hopefully it wasn't too fast, as I was writing my parameter here, it added a new value in my path variables in my parameters. So again, here I can say this value is going to be random. I can save my request and send again. And this time there's no answer. And I'm getting a 404 not found. So you're probably familiar with that error. If you don't find a page, it gives you a 404. And that's only because I've actually edited the path here. And obviously this endpoint does not exist. So I'll just remove it and send it again. Okay, that works. So that was a GET request. Let's go ahead now and look at a POST request. So I'll click the three dots here and I click add request. Call it POST example request. And add it to the same collection. So first thing first, let's change the method to be POST. And as you can see, there's plenty here. These are the main one. There may be other ones. And if there's a method that you want to use, I think there's one that is called title. You can simply write it here and use it as is. But for now, we want to use POST. So let's get POST. And again, this time we'll call the POST endpoint. So I can send it. Once again, it comes with nothing because I've not added any parameters. So no data, no files, no form were sent. And the main difference between a GET request and a POST request is that you can add a body to a POST request. So let's go ahead and look at the different options that are here. I can add a form data, which would be kind of sending a form over my API with like a key, which may be username and a value, then password and a value. I can use form URL encoded, a bit the same as form data, and then row, where I can just write whichever body I want to send. So let's go ahead and do this one. So I'll add a JSON body and I'll say, this is going to be a user who's going to have a name of Scott and an age of 40. Hope I'm not too rude. Cool. So I've added a body. I can now send that request. And if I look at my response here, you can see data is coming back with a user, a name, and an age. So as I added it to my request. All right. Let's go back to the slides. So we've seen how to send a request. These two main methods, I'm not going to go between these two. Like the principle is always the same. You create a new request, change your method, and add the parameters that you'd like. And we've seen how to add parameters as well. So now, kind of the bread and butter of Postman, right? That's how it started. How do you test an API? How do you make sure that it always returns the same thing? There's two types of tests: pre-request scripts, which, as the name say, are going to be executed before a request is sent, and then the test scripts. So let's go ahead and look at the test scripts first. So I've created my post request here. Let's test that it actually works. So I'm going to go to the test tab. And first thing to see here is that if you don't like writing code from scratch, there's a few code snippets that are coming in handy here, and you can just click on them and import them. If you do not see that window when you open your Postman, it may be because it's been reduced just because of the window size. So you may not see it. Make sure that you click on that small arrow and you're going to see the code snippet. So I'm going to go ahead and click on status code is 200. So let's have a look at that. We're using a JavaScript library called chai.js, where you write sessions just like you would write them in the real life. So I expect my response to have a status of 200. And I've created a new test that is called status is 200. So now, if I send that request, in my response, you can now see that in the test results tab, I have a 1 out of 1 because I now have a test and it passed. And I can see status code is 200. If I had a test that failed, so let's say I'm updating my test to be, this should be a 4 or 4. I'm expecting that API to not exist. If I send that request, you can now see that this test result did not work. And it was expecting it to be 404 and it's getting a 200. So not good. There's a ways to automate these tests. It's not something that we're going to go into like this webinar, just because this is a Postman one-on-one and this is a bit more advanced. But there's a lot of content around that on our Postman channel that you can have a look at. Just in general, type in Postman tests and you'll find a lot of stuff. Cool. Let's quickly have a look here before we move into it further. So when you send a request, you have your response here, and you have one view, which is beautified, and this is some nicely organized data. You could also see the row view, which is just your data as row, and a preview. Let's say you were calling a website directly. So if I'm creating a new request, and let's say I'm calling google.com, if I click preview now, I can see the website here, and I could take some actions here. This is not what Postman is about, but it's good to know that you have like an HTML view here. The last one is visualize. This allows you to create your own graphs and your own visualization based on the data you're getting back from the API. But again, if you're interested into that, click learn how, and you'll see all the documentation around that. Not going to go into that because again, it's a bit advanced for that webinar. Let me discard that. Cool. So I've added one test, which passed. I could test other things now. Let's test that the response time is less than 200 milliseconds. Last time it was fine. Let's see if this time it is fine. And we can also test if it contains something. So let's say, what was it? I'm sending a user with a name and an age. So let's check that age is above 21. Okay, so this is how you get your response data. So I'm assigning it to a variable called JSON data, and now I'm going to go here and say JSON data.data.user.age to be above 21. Okay, so let's send that now. And I have 2 out of 3 tests that passed. Status code is 200, and it's fine. Response time is less than 200 milliseconds did not pass this one, simply because it took 206 milliseconds, and age is above 21, passed. So that's how you do tests the easy way in Postman, right? Like all I did was copy pasting code from the snippets. You can do much more advanced testing. You could do conditional workflows based on that. So basically make a test, and based on whether it passes or not, you can take an action and send another request, or do, like, I don't know, take another action based on that. Let's now look at the pre-request scripts. So as I said, these ones, they're going to be set before you send your request. So let's go back to our get request and add a new key, which is going to be a date. So instead of always writing a date like I would here, and every time I go into that API, I have to update that manually, I can set a variable here, and I can say, I'd call that variable date. And now in my pre-request script, what I can do is do, again, using the PM API that you have in Postman, I'm going to set a variable, and this is called date, and I'm going to give it a value of new date. So once I do that, what this does, this is going to execute that code before I send my request and set a date variable to new date. And hopefully this will replace this with the value of date. So let's send this. Cool. Now, as you can see, the API replied, and the response contained a name and a date, which is hopefully 13th of June, 2020, and it is 16:23. So it is UTC, I guess, because it is 5:23 in London, where I'm located. But yeah, so it does work, and I could do some changes in that. Cool. So we've seen tests, we've seen pre-request. You could do a lot of stuff here. Let's say you have, again, some condition to be met before you send a request, or you need to query a third-party endpoint to get an API key, for example. You could do that here, set it as a variable, and then add it to your parameters. All right. So we did this. Hopefully, let me just check that I did not miss anything. Cool. Hopefully that was not too fast, and you got the grasp of the main thing that you can do with Postman. So collections, creating requests, different type of requests, get or post, and adding parameters to this request. Because usually most requests will ask you or require you to send some parameters to know what you want to do with that endpoint. And last but not least, adding tests. Now let's have a look at the tips and tricks. So hopefully things that will be very useful for you. Mostly that will save a lot of time when you're trying to work with Postman. So 4 things we're going to get into: environment variables, code generation, collaboration, and then settings. So let's have a first look at the environment variables. So as you know, or as you've seen before, I've been adding stuff here. And this one is variable that I'm setting through the pre-request scripts. But let's deactivate these ones and add new ones. So let's say now I have a location, which is a parameter that I want to add, and I have, what could I add? An age. So instead of having to write them all here, I'm again going to go with location and create variables for this. So instead of having this, I can create an environment for this. So my environment is going to contain these values. And all I can do is switch between environments to update these values. So the good thing about that is, let's say you have these values that are used in different places in your request. Instead of having to go through every single request and update these values, all you have to do is update the value one single time in the environment. So let's go ahead and create an environment. So I'm going to go here at the top of my app and click Manage Environment. I'm going to add a new environment. I'm going to call that one Webinar Production. So I had 2 variables, location and age. And now you can see there's 2 different values that I can assign. The initial value is valuable when you work in a team. And this is value that's going to be seen by everyone and that you can share with everyone. Current value is what is going to be used in your session. This is never shared with anyone. So I'm going to use that one for now because I'm not planning to work with anyone else. I'm going to say location, London, and age is going to be, I don't know, let's go again for 40. Let's add this environment. Once I have it here, all I need to do is select it in that dropdown. And now it's very subtle, but it changed color. So it went from red to orange. And now you can see that these variables are now resolving. So this one is resolving to London, and this one is resolving to age. Let me actually delete these rows so they're not in the way. So now, again, if I send this, I have London and 40. So the reason why I called webinar production is because you could have different environment per type of server that you're sending your queries to. You usually have a test server or a beta server, and then you have your production server. So what I could have is have another environment called webinar beta with the same value, but this time the location is going to be Bangalore, and the age is going to be, I don't know, 21. Cool. And now, let's say these were the value I wanted to send to my production account, but if I want to create my production server, just switch here, and then straight away this is replaced by the other values. So this can be used when you use that for the URL, for example. Let's say you have two different URLs for your servers. You could replace your URL here by a variable as well, and then in your environment, add a URL. So this time I'm going to have the same for both, just because I do not have a beta URL for this. Cool. And now again, you can see it resolves. You can use variables in a lot of places. And the other thing that you would need to know is that there's different scope of variables. Just like in any programming languages, you have local variables, you have global variables. In some languages, you have class level variables. So it really depends. In Postman, you have local variables, which are the ones that you would define here, for example, in your scripts. You have collection variables, which are the collection levels. For example, if I go to my collection, I can edit it and set variables here. So these ones will always stay with the collection. And if you share that collection with someone, they'll take these values with. You have the environment variables. So as I showed right now, which are the handiest one, I think, because it's very easy to switch from one environment to another. And then you have the global variables. So if you click on the quick look icon here, you can see there's global variables. And these ones, they're available by everywhere in any workspace, in that workspace, sorry. So set a variable here, and any request will be able to access it regardless of the environment that is set up. Cool. So environment variables, very useful. Environment mostly. Just set up your different environments, switch from one to the other, instead of taking the time to switch them all one by one. Next, this one, every time we demo it, there's always a sense of magic when we show it. And we always get like some good reactions, which is a good news. So you've created a request, and let's switch to that one now. You've created a request, you've put your parameters, you've put your body, you're happy with it. But now comes the time where you actually have to code that into your app or into your front end, whichever place where you need to write that again. We want you to know that you don't have to write the code. There's this small button here called code that you can click on. And if you click on that, it actually generates all this code for you already. So all you have to do is click on code, come here and select the language that you like. We have most of them covered. Not going to lie, there's some of them that are not covered. I couldn't say which one, but definitely there's so many languages in the world that are not all covered. But we have PHP, we have OCaml, different libraries in Node.js, PowerShell, Python. So yeah, come here, copy paste that code, and then paste it into your app. And that's pretty much all you have to do. It already comes with everything set up. So if you have different headers that need to be set up, they're already added to your request. If you have a cookie that needs to be added, it's already added. It added the body for you, so you don't have to add it again. So yeah, this one is probably the biggest time saver of them all, just because you do not have to redo the work. What you've done in Postman, you can already use it in your app, basically. Let's keep going. So collaboration. I've talked a lot about it. It's always good when people come together, and it's even better when it simplifies the way you share your work. So there's different ways to collaborate. Main way, you'd want to collaborate with your colleagues. Second way is collaborate with outside people, right? Like you've created your app or your API, you're happy with it, and you want to share that with the outside people. So let's start and look at how to collaborate with other people. So I have this collection, and I'm gonna save it all and close. So I have my webinar collection, right? And I want my other colleagues to be able to edit it. So what I can do is go here on the small play button here and click share. This gives me different options. These ones I'm going to go into when we look at sharing publicly. But I can see that I can select a workspace. So I've previously created my Mifflin workspace with my favorite colleagues in there. So I can just click here and click share and continue. I can give them different roles. They're all editors. That's fine by me. So I'm going to save roles, and now I'll switch to my team. So now you can see my collection is here, and my colleagues that are in the same workspace, most of them are inactive for some reason. Guess that they're not working that hard. Will be able to access it. So let's switch to Drightshirt. So Drightshirt joins the workspace in the Mifflin, and it's going to take a while. So obviously you need to sync your API. So this is what happens when you create an account with Postman. Your data is linked to your account. So wherever you log into your Postman account, you'll be able to access the data. So this may take a bit longer. Okay, let's see. Cool. So I have my webinar collection, and I'm now able to access it, and I'm going to do some changes. So remember when I set these variables, I set them in the initial value and not the, in the current value and not the initial value. So it's not available for everyone. So what Dwight is going to do, is going to create a new environment. It's going to add location, and it's going to put it here. So London, age, and URL. Cool. So now there's an environment, it's selected, and because it's in the initial value, now anyone accessing that team workspace will be able to work with that. It could create a new collection for them to work on as well. Shared collection directly in the workspace. So you do not have to come from a personal workspace and share to a team workspace. You can simply create a new collection here and say shared request. Okay, let's make it query. I think it's http bin.org. Cool. So that's a website like another one. So I have created that new collection, and I'm going to switch back to Michael Scott, who's going to just look over what he's done and make sure that it was done well. So again, as you can see, the data is syncing. I need to give it a second, and it's going to retrieve everything that Dwight has done. So it's taking a bit longer. Okay, cool. So I have my request here that he just created in that account, and I can see it as well. I have an environment that I can select, and everything is resolved. Cool. So team workspace, good if you want to work with people. You do not have to be on any paid plan. Everything I'm doing on that demo, by the way, is done on the free plan, so you'd be able to do the same. So yeah, use that if you're in any team size. If there's 2 of you, if there's 10 of you, you can use that. It makes it much easier than having to export your collection, copy paste the code, send it to someone else. They have to import it in the app. We still see a lot of people doing that. So we want to make sure that you're all aware that you can collaborate directly within Postman and you do not have to go out of it. Okay, so Michael Scott has looked at that. He's very happy with this. And now he wants other people to be able to to query it or to access the documentation for this. So let's make sure that it is shared with the outside world. So as I showed you before, there were other options here. So you can embed, which what this does, that creates a run in Postman button that you can put on your website. And whenever someone clicks on that button, it's going to import that same collection to their workspace. The other one is a public link. This creates a simple text, which is the JSON exported of your collection. So again, people can just import it. But these are not the best ways to do that. The best way, or the one that we would recommend you to use, is to click View in Web and to publish your collection as documentation. So what this does, creates an actual complete documentation, API documentation view of your collection. So you can see I have my 2 requests that I've created before. So my get example, my post example, I have the example request here, and I could change the language that is used in my documentation. And now I can publish that. So I'll go ahead. I can say, let's use that environment, change the color if I want to. I don't particularly want to, I like these colors, and publish. Oh, I said publish. Cool. So my collection published, and now it is available online for anyone to see. I can't share that with you, but if you have a good eye and you want to write that in your browser, this is a public URL. Now you can share that with anyone out there. Any developer that you want to have a go at your API, you can share that with them. Makes it much easier on your side because you're not going to get tons of questions about how do I use your API. Makes it much easier on their side because they don't have to ask you 1,000 times how to use your API. And again, all that started from the collection. I did not add any documentation. I did not add anything. I could. I can go back to my, I can go back to here, and I could edit here and say, this is my docs. I could add a description. This is an endpoint that doesn't do much for now. And all of this is going to be replicated in my collection here once it gets, so again, it takes a little time to sync, but yeah, so now you can see it as docs. There's these. All right, so that was collaboration. This one is, yeah, I guess collaboration is probably one of the biggest thing in Postman, and we now describe Postman as the collaboration platform. This is what it is now. It's where people come and collaborate on their APIs. Last but not least, dark theme. Everyone wants that. Before Postman had it, everyone was asking for it. It had it for a while, but let's show you how to reach that. So you have these little buttons at the top right. This one is to access your account or to switch accounts. This one is for the proxy and interceptor. So you can use Postman to capture requests coming in and out of your browser and analyze them as they go. And this one is the settings. So from here, you can access our Twitter, our documentation, and release notes, but mostly you'd want to access the settings. There's a lot of settings that you can change here. Request-wise, you could use the next generation URL processing. You can disable or enable the SSL certificate verification, change the timeout in second. There's headers, settings, user interface, if you want to set a bigger font size, turn off the viable autocomplete. I would advise that you spend some time in the setting to make sure that you tailor Postman to your needs. Just go in there, spend some time, get familiar with the different settings, but mostly switch to the themes. And if you like dark mode, just click here, and voila. This is a lifesaver for your eyes. You do not have, if you work at night, some people do, you do not have to like light the whole room. So yeah, that's all you have to do. Go to settings, themes, and switch from one to the other. Cool. All right, so next. Hopefully you've learned a lot, but that was a lot as well to ingest. But one thing that I'm sure is that you'll still have questions, and hopefully you'll still be eager to learn more about Postman. So I'm going to show you where to go for these things. First one is the in-app bootcamp. I've talked about lessons at the very beginning when I showed you the launchpad. So all these lessons, you can find them if you click on bootcamp in the in the footer of the app. So if I click here, I've got a new page that opens, and these are all the lessons that are available. So these lessons are in-app lessons, which are going to lead you step by step into how you would do one of these things. So let's say I'm going to look how would I design an API. Actually, let me do restart. Okay, so opens all these type of little boxes for you and tells you what to do. So it's going to tell me we need to import a collection. So let's go ahead and import. And now it's going to tell me import the collection. And all these steps, one by one, is going to lead you through designing an API. So I'm not going to go through this all. They all take about 5 minutes each, I would say. And there's 6 of them. I would recommend to go through them. It doesn't take a lot of time. And it's going to show you a lot more. It's going to be much more practical than what I've showed you. Because like listening to someone showing something is good. Practicing it, I think, is much better to learn the skill. So first thing I would recommend, go to the bootcamp, go through this lesson, and you'll learn a lot from that. Second thing, it's kind of the link to rule them all. It's the one you need to have, postman.com/support. So our support center, there's many places where you can find support. Main thing that you would need to do if you have any question that I would recommend, visit our documentation, so our learning center. It's learning.postman.com, and you can see it here. Any question that you have, let's say I talked about monitoring, for example. Let's have a look at monitoring, and this is how you would do monitoring. Our documentation is, I want to say, exhaustive. I think everything is covered. So go ahead, look for what you're trying to do. And if you don't find the answer, if you have a specific use case that you want to talk about, you can reach to the Postman community on community.postman.com. There's a lot of us. So a lot of us that are in the chat right now answering your questions, or myself, are on this community forum. But also a lot of Postman users are in there, and they're sharing their experience. They're happy to help with anything. And also we have Danny here. Danny has an answer for everyone to anything. So if no one answers, Danny will definitely answer. So you can go there, share your questions, share your use cases, and we'll be happy to help. Next, something may happen in your app. You may have a bug, you may have a configuration issue, or in other case, you may feel like the app is missing something. So if you want to report a bug or send a feature request, you have GitHub. So you can go to our GitHub repository called Postman App Support, click create a new issue, and here you can create a bug report, a feature request, security report. This is going to lead you to the right pages to do that. Second to last, the Postman roadmap. If you'd like to know more about what's happening or what's going to happen soon, what's coming up, you can view the roadmap. This is what's been released in the release tab. We have near term, midterm, what's cooking, or what we are planning to do. Visit the roadmap. And this one is the last one. If you did not find your answer in any of these places, or if we were not able to help you here, we have an amazing support team that's always going to be happy to help you. Submit a ticket, let them know what's not working, or if you need more information about something, whether it is pricing or just how to change something in your account. Submit a ticket, and they'll reply back to you, usually very quickly. So do not hesitate. You can use that. Cool. So that was the link to rule them all. And now I want to talk about the API network. So when I published my collection earlier, I just published it anonymously because obviously there's nothing much in there and I don't want anyone else to access it. But if you have a very good collection that you want to share with people, when you publish, you have the option to add to the API network. So that's the API network. It's a repository of APIs from, I want to say, thousands of companies that are putting their stuff out there for you to use. So it's sorted by by category: health services, entertainment, development, etc. We can have a look at one of them. Let's have a look at Ship Engine. So what they've done, Ship Engine, they've created two main collections. One is a walkthrough. So as a developer, you could use that to see how to use the API step by step, or an API reference. So two things you can do. Let's have a look at the documentation first and see what this does. So as you can see, they've personalized their page. They've put some colors, and it tells you how to do, for example, carry integrations step by step. The other things you can do from there, let's say if you want to use someone else's API, or if you publish your own API, you can click run in Postman. So what this does, this imports the collection straight away in Postman, and now, and I have my Ship Engine API that's here, and it's all these endpoints that are now ready to use. So see, they've used variables as well. So if I had, I'm guessing I need some authentication for that, so I'm not going to run this this request. But yeah, all of this is now here, and I can just use it out of the box. So I don't need to create it all by myself. So another thing that I would recommend when you get started with a third-party API, do not start from scratch. Click on New, and use these two tabs to look for something that is already existing. Let's say I want to use Azure API. I can type in Azure, and I can see there's already people that have shared collections. So you may want to use one of these instead of creating from scratch. And I think with that, I've covered it all. I've talked a lot. I've talked nonstop. Hopefully did not lose all of you. There's still 5,000 of you around. So hopefully, I guess that's a good sign. I'm going to move on to the Q&A, but before I want to share a couple of things. The first one is that if you like Postman, or if you just like collaborating on something in general, feel free to join us every Thursday at 7 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So it's usually either my colleague Joycelyn or myself, us two, or with guests. During an hour, we build something from scratch. It may use Postman, it may not. But yeah, basically we start from scratch. You do not need to have any particular knowledge to join. If you're just interested in creating new things, or in like participating in creating new things, join us. I think, so a couple of weeks ago, what we did was playing with the Hue Lights API. In the future, Twitch, for example, what we'll do, we'll open that to anyone. So any of you will be able to change the light in Joyce or my house as we go during the stream. So this is the kind of like fun things during an hour that we create. So if that sounds interesting to you, please do join. We'd be happy to have you. Before we go into the Q&A, I'll answer all your questions during the Q&A, but we'd like you to answer some of our questions regarding the webinars. So please note down that URL. You do not have to reply right now. Note it down somewhere. Make sure that you answer the questions. If you like the webinar, my name is Arlemi. If you did not like, my name is Michael Scott. But make sure that you reply to all the questions. We had a lot of people helping as well. But what this helps us is know how we can do better for the webinars. If you should target specific topics, that's the kind of question you'll have, like what do you want to see next? So I'll give that 30 more seconds so you can put it down somewhere. So it's bit.ly/Postman one-on-one June. Yeah, there's going to be a bunch of questions to know who you are and what you want to see next in our webinars. All right. So with that said, let's go into the Q&A. Okay, so I can see there's still more than 100 questions that aren't answered. I'm probably not going to go through them all, but my colleagues have been nice enough that they've put some questions aside for me, so I can have a look at them and make sure that I reply to them. So one of the questions is how to validate dynamic JSON response body using JSON schema. So let's do that as we go. We'll go back to, I'll delete this because it takes a lot of space. Okay, so I had an example of actually testing the JSON here, but I think you can have this. So you have the last snippet in the line, which is tiny validator for JSON data. So you can actually define your schema and how it should look, and it's going to make sure that this validates by the standards of this tiny validator. So again, this is kind of built out of the box. Obviously, you'll have to define your schema. We can't infer your schema, but yeah, that's what you can do. If you're very interested in more like API design as a whole, I'd recommend looking at the API builder, and there's a lot of stuff happening there, which are more into the API design side. Is anyone using Postman to address health data or med advice information from EHR systems such as Cerner, Epic, or Meditech? So I'm not quite familiar with all this organization. What I know is that if you're looking for healthcare data, so there's two things that I would recommend. First one being look at the API network. As I said, there's a health services place, so you can have a look at these ones and you can make sure that you use their data. The second one, which is more newsworthy, I would say, we have COVID-19 API Resource Center, where an API that provides data for that, or anyone that is willing to be put on this will be here, and you can have a look at their documentation and run it in Postman. So if that's something that you're interested in, have a look here. This is also open source, so if you want to contribute, make sure that you join us here. Okay, next question. Is there any idea of integrating with Swagger to generate an API set of requests? Well, that's a very good question, actually. So that's something that I did not go into, but that I would talk about it for hours. And actually, I have talked about it for hours, because the last webinar that I did was API Builder. So if you look at our YouTube channel, there's probably, the second to last video is Postman API Builder webinar, where the product manager for the API Builder and myself are going through a set of demos of what the API Builder is capable of. And one of these things is actually generating collection based on the schema. I can give a quick demo right now. So if you create a new API, let's say I'm creating a Open API 3, and I'll give it a version. So this actually creates a dummy schema for me that I can use. And from here, I can just say generate collection, say that it's going to be a documentation. And now I have a collection here with the endpoint and the different documentation that was there, the base URL, etc. So yeah, you can do that with Postman, and that's one of the main things that we're going towards, right? Like, people are going to start designing the APIs first. So you see more and more people starting from the API rather than collection, and you generate collections from the API builder. But for Postman one-on-one, I think we want to cover mostly collection. And if you're interested in more, again, make sure that you check out that webinar. There's a lot in there. Cool. Next question. Can Postman test be added to a DevOps pipeline? For example, Microsoft DevOps build pipeline. So that's something I did not get into. But yeah, we have actually a CLI collection runner called Newman. So if you go to our, if you just go to NPM, if you go to our GitHub, or wherever you type in Newman CLI, you'll find information about this, which is basically you can, whether from the API or exporting your collection, you can run collections from a CLI. So this is easily integrated into Azure DevOps pipeline, or any pipeline for that matter. So yeah, you can do that. Is there any way to store a Postman collection test in source control? Let's have a look at the documentation. So we have different integration with Bitbucket, GitHub, GitLab, etc. So yeah, you can back up your collection to GitHub, to GitLab, etc. Backing up collection is only for paid plans, though. So if you have any questions regarding this, you can go to our website, check the pricing plans, etc. But yeah, so it is available, but for paid plans. Is it possible to create custom code snippets for a language that is not yet available? So if the question is, can you create your own code snippets? No, and we have a feature request for that. If your question is whether you can participate and create a code generator with us, this is another one of our open source repository. So if you go to our GitHub and you look for code generator, code gen, you have this repository that we are more than happy to have you like participate in and push code to. So if there's a language that is not covered and that you feel should be, either open an issue here to let us know or create a pull request right away and we'll have a look at it. Can I use other languages than JavaScript in the test tab? No, for now, all we support in the test and pre-request script tabs are JavaScript. Okay, that's a lot of question. A question about if I don't see the Launchpad, how to make it reappear. So the Launchpad, which is again, that thing that welcomes you every time, you can actually disable it here. If you disabled it, then obviously you don't have that page. And if I'm not mistaken, it should be in the settings. Actually, I'm not 100% sure, but yeah. So here in the user interface, you have enable Launchpad. So if you by mistake turn it off, you can come here, turn it back on, and next time you open the app, it will show up. If a workspace is not shared, can the docs be made the same way and can then be shared publicly? Another very good question. So one way to not share documentation, as I showed before, let's say you're on your personal workspace and you just want that documentation for yourself. If you click View in Web, this actually shows you the documentation and it's not published. So this is not published and you can use that for yourself. If you're in a team context and you just want that documentation to be available for your team, you may want to have a look at the private API network. So let me close these tabs so we don't get too lost. So when I was showing you the API network, there's also a private API network, which is only for my team. And here I can add documentation and APIs and stuff that is only available for my team. So this is a new feature it's probably 2 weeks or a month old now. Same as always, if you're interested in sharing things only with your team, go to the documentation and look for private API network, and you get the information around it. Okay, more questions. Best way to look for start learning Postman as a complete beginner. I think this one was probably answered a lot, quite a bit when I showed the bootcamp. I think that's a very good way to start. The other way to start is to, again, look at the templates. There's a template created by one of my colleagues called Learn by API. I think it's actually maybe here. Let's see. I actually don't know where exactly it is here, but let me have a look here. I don't know. I'll be able to find that and I can share to that person. But yeah, you'll be able to find plenty of templates like these ones, for example, introduction to writing tests that shows you how to write tests, how to reverse engineer an API, how to work with GraphQL. So there's plenty of them. I wanted to show one specific one, but there's plenty of other ones. How to do visualizer as well. So, oh, actually that's the one, API Learner. So yeah, that's another good way to start. Go to templates, type Learn API, and you'll find plenty of either community-made or Postman-made templates that can help you get started. Can Postman create your API documentation for a production API? Yeah, definitely. Basically what I showed, the difference between your production API and your test API here is probably going to be the URL. So you just have to change the URL with your production API and publish as documentation. So anything, yeah, like all these companies that you can see here, these are their production API that are shared here. So yeah, there's nothing against that. Can you publish collection with masked variables like passwords and tokens? So as I was saying at the beginning, when I was talking about environment variables, one thing you want to do here is to make sure that you're not sharing sensitive data with outside people, whether it is when you share a collection or when you publish documentation. Make sure that you use the current value for sensitive data and initial value for what's not. So for example, if I were to use an API key, what you can write here is just API key. And then here you put your actual API key. So when I publish that documentation, the user will only see API key and they know that that has to be replaced with the API key. But this is a placeholder and they won't see the sensitive data. So yeah. If the environments are not shared, shouldn't Dwight have to put those variables into the collection variables? So yeah, that's back to when I was demoing the Dwight creating a new environment. He could have put it in the collection variables, but he can also create an environment because when he created one, this environment was created in the team workspace. So this is available for everyone to see. So as long the mistake was more made by Michael, who when he shared the collection to the team workspace did not share the environment that was going with it. So that's why Dwight had to create that environment instead. Does this open in Postman work on private APIs or just from the API network? Most of my company uses private APIs internal. So I'm not sure about the question. I'm guessing the question is if you have a private API at least shared in the private API network, is it only opening in your account? So the private API network that I showed here, you would only be able to access it if you're part of that team. So let's say I switch to an account that is not part of any team. So as you can see, I have plenty. I will have my own API network here. So I will not be able to access the other one. So therefore, I think to answer the question, whichever API is shared in the private API network will only work for this team, as it is only shared with that team. Okay, so I think we had a lot of questions. I think I've answered. Obviously, I've not answered all of the questions. I can still see there's plenty out there. Mostly for those of you whose question has not been answered, one link to rule demo. So go to the support center, learning center, Postman community, open a ticket if you still can't find your answer. Or you can reach out to me as well. Again, I'm on Twitter at Arlemi, or you can find me, just Google Arlemi. Do not hesitate. I think I'm going to end now because we're like 5 minutes after the hour. Hopefully you've learned a lot of stuff. Hopefully it's going to be easier to get started with Postman now. Or last one is hopefully you've not learned anything and you knew it all. That's even better. But that's why we're here anyway. If you didn't know, we're here to share the knowledge. So yeah, hope you liked it. And we'll see you later. Bye-bye.